The HOA thought they could squeeze me. They just awakened a sleeping giant. They thought a petty HOA fine would make me bow down to their power-hungry demands, not realizing they just picked a fight with the chief of police. But what happens when I uncover their illegal operation targeting our community's hardworking first responders and decide it's time for the hunter to become the hunted? Welcome to my channel. Comment below where you're watching from. I'll never forget that morning. It started like any other, the crisp autumn air biting at my cheeks as I headed to the precinct, but it ended up detonating a war in our seemingly peaceful neighborhood. As I walked out to my car, ready for another day in the trenches, something garishly bright green stabbed out from under my windshield wiper. At first, I dismissed it as another takeout menu, but a sickening dread coiled in my gut as I recognized the officious font. It was an HOA violation notice. $79 fine. Improper lawn maintenance. You've got to be kidding me. I stood there, the weight of my uniform suddenly heavier, the lukewarm coffee in my hand feeling like lead. Staring at my lawn, I felt a slow burn ignite in my chest. It looked exactly as it had for the past 15 years I'd lived here. The grass was green, healthy, and recently mowed. Sure, maybe it wasn't perfect, manicured like a golf course, but it was neat and well maintained. Then I heard it, the unmistakable, predatory click of high heels on the sidewalk. "Good morning!" The voice dripped sugary sweetness, but beneath it, a layer of ice threatened to shatter my teeth. Karen Wainwright, our newest HOA board member, was on her morning inspection walk, her tablet clutched like a weapon. She'd moved in 6 months ago and immediately launched a campaign for a board position. Now, 3 weeks into her reign of terror, she was methodically dismantling everyone's peace of mind. "Miss Wainwright." I nodded politely, holding up the offending notice. "Mind explaining this? My lawn meets all reasonable standards." She barely glanced up from her tablet, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in disdain. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Guidelines clearly states that grass height must not exceed 3 inches. Yours is approximately 3.5. She said this while tapping away at her screen, undoubtedly logging another violation. I took a slow, deliberate breath, channeling years of training in diffusing volatile situations. "I've been a bit busy this week with a major case at work. I'll mow it this weekend." "Rules are rules," she chirped, finally meeting my gaze, her eyes cold and devoid of empathy. "The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. Oh, and you might want to do something about those garden gnomes. They're not on the approved decoration list." My garden gnomes. The ones my late wife, Emily, had lovingly collected over decades. A wave of grief and fury washed over me, tightening my chest. I forced my voice to remain level. "I wasn't aware we needed approval for garden decorations that have been here for over a decade. New board, new rules." She waved her tablet dismissively. "We're bringing this neighborhood into the modern age. No more tacky decorations lowering property values." As she clicked away down the sidewalk, I saw her stop at Emily's house next door. Emily was an ER nurse, a hero, who had just finished a grueling night shift. The last thing she needed was Karen's petty harassment about her garbage bins being out too long. I watched, a knot forming in my stomach, as Karen started snapping photos of Emily's property. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about my lawn or my gnomes anymore. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I'd learned to recognize the insidious patterns of harassment and abuse of power. Karen wasn't just being strict. She was targeting specific residents, grinding them down with relentless, pointless rules. Back in my car, I yanked out my phone and started scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group. The complaints about Karen were piling up, a digital avalanche of frustration and resentment. Kevin, the firefighter on the corner, had been fined for his kid's basketball hoop. The elderly couple across the street got a violation for their unapproved rose bushes, planted in memory of their son. Even the local teacher had been cited for parking his unsightly car in his driveway. As I was about to pull out of my driveway, I saw Karen taking more pictures of my gnomes, her lips pursed in a self-satisfied smirk. She didn't know it yet, but she just made a serious mistake. Being chief of police had taught me one vital lesson. Sometimes the biggest crimes aren't the ones that make headlines, but the small, corrosive injustices that chip away at a community's spirit. As I drove to work, my mind was already formulating a plan. Karen thought she held all the cards, wielded all the power. But she had no idea who she was dealing with, or the dark secrets I would unearth when I started digging beneath her perfect facade. 2 days after finding that ridiculous, lime green ticket, I arrived home from my double shift to find 2 black SUVs with HOA security emblazoned on the sides, completely blockading my driveway. Exhaustion slammed into me like a physical blow. I just wanted to park my car and get some sleep, but no, Karen Wainwright had other plans. I watched through my windshield as she strutted across my front lawn in her designer suit, her tablet a glowing rectangle in her hand, taking pictures of everything from my garden hose to my welcome mat. Each flash of her camera sent another jolt of adrenaline through my system. I forced myself to remain calm. 20 years on the force had drilled into me that losing your temper only gives the other side the upper hand. "Excuse me," I called out, stepping out of my car. "You're blocking my driveway, and I need to get to my garage." Karen spun around, her perfectly styled blonde hair swishing like a shampoo commercial. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Miller, our neighborhood's most persistent rule breaker." She tapped her tablet screen with her long, blood-red nails. "Let's see, unpaid fine for lawn height violations, unapproved garden gnome placement, and now..." She paused for dramatic effect. "Non-regulation mailbox color." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound tinged with disbelief. "Non-regulation mailbox color? The mailbox is white. It's been white for the 15 years I've lived here. According to our new guidelines, approved last week, all mailboxes must be painted pristine pearl white from the David Paint Company collection. Your mailbox is clearly classic white, a completely different shade." She smiled, the expression as sharp and brittle as shattered glass, like she had just won a trophy. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Karen, I understand you're new to the neighborhood, but these security vehicles are parked illegally. They're blocking access to my property, which is a violation of City Ordinance 20-345. Her smile flickered, just for a fraction of a second. "I have full authority as an HOA board member to enforce our community standards. These security officers..." She gestured to 2 guys in ill-fitting uniforms leaning against their SUVs. "Are here to ensure compliance." That's when I noticed something jarring about their badges. They looked almost like real police badges, but not quite. As chief of police, I knew every licensed security company in our jurisdiction, and Wainwright Security Solutions wasn't one of them. I took a deep breath, trying one last time to reason with her. "Look, I get that you're trying to maintain property values, but blocking someone's driveway over a $79 fine isn't just unreasonable, it's illegal. I'd hate to have to escalate this." Karen's face flushed crimson, matching her nails. "Is that a threat, Mr. Miller? Because I have photos documenting every violation on your property, and the HOA board will be very interested in your aggressive attitude." She turned to the security guards. "Make a note of his threatening behavior." As they fumbled with their notepads, I noticed their shoulder patches were peeling off, the cheap fabric fraying at the edges. They looked like they'd been printed at a local copy shop. Something wasn't adding up here, and my cop instincts were screaming. I pulled up the city's business license database on my phone, keeping one eye on Karen as she continued photographing my property. 3 taps later, I had what I needed, or rather, what wasn't there: no licensed security company registered under her name or her brother's, who I'd seen at the last HOA meeting wearing a similar uniform. Just then, Mrs. Maria from next door came rushing out of her house in her nurse's scrubs, her face etched with worry. "Chief Miller, I'm so glad you're here. They've been blocking my driveway too, and I'm late for my hospital shift." I watched Karen's face closely as she heard the word "Chief." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and her tablet nearly slipped from her fingers. But instead of backing down, she lifted her chin even higher. "Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Miller. HOA rules apply to everyone equally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to document a few more violations before I process the additional fines for your uncooperative behavior." As she walked away, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, I knew this was far from over. It was just the beginning. I had a feeling Karen's perfect HOA world was about to get a lot more complicated, especially once I started looking into exactly how these new security measures got approved. I never expected a simple lawn dispute to uncover something so disturbing in our peaceful neighborhood. It started when Emily, an ER nurse who lives 3 houses down, pounded on my door at 6 a.m., still in her scrubs and fighting back tears. She'd just finished a brutal overnight shift dealing with the aftermath of a multi-car pile-up, only to find her entire front yard plastered with bright orange violation notices. "Chief," she said, her hands shaking as she held up the stack of papers. "They're threatening to put a lien on my house because my garbage bin stayed out for an extra day while I was working a double shift during the crisis." The sight of this dedicated nurse, who just spent 16 hours saving lives, being harassed over garbage bins, made my blood boil. But Emily wasn't alone. As I started asking around, more stories emerged, each one more infuriating than the last. Kevin, the firefighter on Maple Street, showed me citation after citation for his kid's basketball hoop, the same hoop that had been there for 5 years without issue, before Karen joined the board. The Martinez family got fined because their Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past Karen's arbitrary deadline. They'd been at their grandmother's funeral. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, spreading out all the complaints like pieces of a twisted puzzle. The pattern was becoming chillingly clear. Karen wasn't just being picky, she was specifically targeting homes where people work long or irregular hours: first responders, nurses, doctors, firefighters, people who couldn't always be home to jump at her every whim. My police instincts were screaming. I started mapping out every citation issued in the past 3 months, since Karen took power. The cluster of violations formed a distinct pattern around homes of emergency workers and those who had dared to oppose her during the HOA election. This wasn't random, this was calculated harassment. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Tom, my deputy, who lived in the next subdivision. "Chief, you're not going to believe this. Remember that flooding issue last spring? Just found out Karen's brother's company got the contract for drainage repair. Cost 3 times what the other bids quoted." I leaned back in my chair, a cold fury settling in my gut. I remembered how Karen had laughed in my face earlier that day when I tried to reason with her about my fine. "Rules are rules," she'd said, that smug smile never leaving her face. But now I understood, these weren't rules, this was a power trip, and possibly something even more sinister. Just then, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Chen from across the street, an elderly widow who'd lived here longer than anyone. "Chief," she whispered, looking over her shoulder nervously. "I saw them installing cameras on the streetlights today. They didn't ask permission. Karen says it's for security, but they're all pointed at specific houses, including yours." My jaw tightened. Unauthorized surveillance in my jurisdiction. Now Karen wasn't just being a nuisance, she was potentially breaking the law. But I needed more proof before I could act. If I moved too quickly, she'd play the victim, claim I was abusing my position as chief. As I walked Mrs. Chen home, I spotted Karen in her driveway, talking to 2 men I'd never seen before. They wore uniforms from her brother's security company, but something about them felt off. My gut told me there was more to this story, and in 20 years of police work, my gut had rarely been wrong. I closed my eyes, remembering what my mentor used to say. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Karen had built herself a little kingdom of fear and intimidation, but she'd made one crucial mistake: she'd gotten too confident, too sloppy. She didn't realize that while she was watching us, we were watching her too. The real question now wasn't just about stopping Karen. It was about exposing the whole corrupt system she'd built. As I looked at the growing pile of evidence on my desk, I knew tomorrow would be a very interesting day at the HOA emergency meeting, especially when they discovered who had just been quietly appointed to the county's Housing Authority Oversight Committee. I couldn't sleep that night, the injustice burning a hole in my stomach. I went over the details again, analyzing Karen's moves, searching for the missing piece that would unlock the whole puzzle. The next morning, while drinking my coffee, I remembered a crucial lesson from my early days as a rookie cop: follow the money. The security company blocking my driveway had seemed oddly eager to do Karen's bidding, and their uniforms looked suspiciously new. At work, I asked Jenny from our records department to run a basic business check on the security company. Elite Neighborhood Watch Services. Within minutes, my suspicions hardened. The company had only been registered 3 months ago, right after Karen joined the HOA board. The owner's last name matched Karen's maiden name, and the business address led to a P.O. box instead of a real office. I drove by Emily's house on my lunch break. She was just getting home from her hospital shift, looking utterly defeated. "Chief," she called out when she saw me, her voice barely a whisper. "They left another notice this morning. I can't keep paying these fines on a nurse's salary." She showed me a stack of violation notices, all signed by Karen, all citing obscure HOA rules that seemed to target working people specifically. Back at the station, I dug deeper into public records. Karen's brother, Tom Wainwright, had a history of failed security companies in 3 different states. Each time, complaints had been filed about aggressive tactics and unauthorized vehicle blocking, but they'd always disappeared before any real investigation could start. My next stop was the county clerk's office. The friendly clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped me pull HOA registration documents from the last 6 months. Flipping through the pages, I found exactly what I needed. Karen had never disclosed her family connection to the security company when bidding for the HOA contract. That was a clear violation of the HOA's conflict of interest rules. But the real gold mine came when I checked Karen's home business registration. She'd been running a daycare center from her garage, caring for 6 kids at a time. The HOA rules strictly prohibited commercial activities, the very same rules she'd been using to fine other neighbors for having home offices. Even better, she didn't have proper childcare licensing from the state. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin, the firefighter. "Chief, you need to see this." He sent me photos of Karen's security company cars parked in fire lanes around the neighborhood. As a firefighter, he knew exactly how dangerous this was. "We couldn't get a truck through there if we needed to," his message read. I spent the rest of the afternoon building my case. Property maps showed Karen had extended her back fence 2 feet beyond her property line. Security camera footage from my cruiser proved her company had blocked emergency vehicle access multiple times. The HOA's financial records revealed she'd been pushing the board to increase fines while directing all security contracts to her brother's company. The evidence was mounting, a tidal wave of incriminating documents. But I had to be smart about how I used it. Karen had friends on the city council, and I needed to make sure everything was completely legal and properly documented. I made copies of every document and stored them in both digital and physical formats. Years of police work had taught me to always have backups. Just as I was finishing up, Officer Rodriguez rushed into my office, her face pale. "Chief, you won't believe this. That security company tried to boot Dr. Williams's car at the emergency room entrance. He was rushing in for a critical surgery." My blood boiled, a white-hot rage threatening to consume me. But I kept my cool. This was the final piece I needed. I sat back in my chair, looking at the wall of evidence I'd gathered. Karen had no idea what was coming. In her rush to build her little kingdom of power, she'd left a trail of violations that would shock even her supporters on the HOA board. The real question now was timing, when and how to present this information for maximum impact. A text message lit up my phone screen. It was from one of my sergeants. "Karen just submitted a proposal for expanded security measures. Emergency HOA meeting called for tomorrow night." I smiled, a grim satisfaction spreading through me. The perfect moment had just presented itself. Sometimes, the best investigations are the ones where you let your target walk right into the trap they've set for others. Walking into that HOA meeting, my heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and resolve. I kept my face impassive, a mask of professional detachment. Karen stood at the front of the room in her designer suit, waving around a stack of papers outlining her new community safety program. I watched as she droned on about hiring more security guards and adding surveillance cameras to every street, her voice dripping with condescension. The whole room seemed cowed by her endless rules, but everyone was too intimidated to speak up. I waited until she finished her self-serving speech about protecting our property values. Then, just as she asked for a vote, I raised my hand. The familiar weight of my badge in my pocket grounded me, a reminder of the oath I had sworn to protect and serve. Before we vote, I said, my voice calm but carrying, I think there's something everyone needs to know. Karen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She didn't recognize me out of uniform. And who are you? I'm Michael David, and I've been investigating some concerning issues in our community. I pulled out my stack of papers, property records, business licenses, photographs, the evidence meticulously organized and damning. The projector clicked on, illuminating the screen with the first slide, Karen's illegal home business setup, clear as day. These pictures show an unlicensed daycare operation running out of your house, Mrs. Wainwright. That's against both HOA rules and state regulations. Karen's face flushed crimson. How dare you? This is private property. Public records aren't private, I replied calmly, advancing to the next slide, the business registration showing her brother owned Safe Shield Security, the same company now patrolling our streets without proper licensing. Neither is this. The room erupted in whispers, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the gathered neighbors. Karen's brother, sensing the impending disaster, tried to make a break for the door, but two uniformed officers I'd stationed outside were already waiting for him. Karen jumped to her feet, her voice shrill with desperation. This is ridiculous. You can't use police resources for personal vendettas. You're right, I said, a hint of steel entering my voice. That's why everything I'm presenting tonight came from public records and legal channels, including the documents showing your conflict of interest in awarding security contracts to your brother's unlicensed company. The room erupted again, the murmurs swelling into a roar of outrage. Neighbors began sharing their own stories, a cathartic outpouring of years of pent-up frustration and resentment. The single mom fined for Christmas lights in January while she worked double shifts. The elderly couple targeted for their medical equipment delivery van. The kindergarten teacher cited for children's chalk drawings on her driveway. Mrs. Williams, the retired school principal and longest-serving board member, stood up, her voice trembling with anger. I move to immediately remove Karen Wainwright from the board and launch a full audit of all fines issued under her authority. Second, 5 voices called out at once, a chorus of righteous indignation. Karen's face had drained of all color, replaced by a mask of terrified fury. You can't do this. I was protecting property values. I was maintaining standards. No, I said quietly, my gaze unwavering. You were bullying people who didn't have time to fight back. But that ends today. The vote was unanimous. As Karen stormed out, her designer handbag swinging wildly, neighbors began hugging each other, a collective sigh of relief sweeping through the room. Emily, the ER nurse who'd received 8 citations, was crying as she embraced Kevin, the firefighter who'd nearly lost his kid's basketball hoop. I stayed late, helping Mrs. Williams start the paperwork to refund every unfair fine. We found over $115,000 worth of citations, each one more ridiculous and punitive than the last. As we worked, neighbors kept dropping by with coffee, snacks, and stories of hope and renewal. The next morning, I drove to work past Karen's house. A moving truck was already in her driveway, her brother's security vehicles conspicuously absent, replaced by legitimate patrol cars making sure the moving company had proper permits. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People started coming out again, their faces bright with newfound freedom. Kids played in their yards without fear of citations, and Mrs. Williams organized a community barbecue to celebrate the return of common sense and neighborly kindness. But the best moment came a week later. I was watering my lawn, now precisely 3.5 inches tall, when Emily's daughter ran up with a handmade card. Inside was a crayon drawing of me in my police uniform, standing in front of a rainbow-colored house, surrounded by smiling faces. The message read, "Thank you for making our neighborhood happy again." That card sits on my desk at the station now, a constant reminder that sometimes the most important police work happens right at home, in the small, quiet acts of courage and community that make a difference in people's lives. Our community learned a valuable lesson. True power isn't about control or domination, it's about how you use your influence to uplift and protect those around you. And as for Karen, last I heard, she tried to join another HOA board 2 towns over. But somehow, they'd already heard all about her experience with us. The information in this video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. HOA rules and laws vary by state and community.